Welcome, dear seeker. More than 2.5 millennia ago, the Buddha offered a way of understanding the human mind that was remarkably precise, practical, and grounded in direct observation. Without instruments, laboratories, or formal experiments, he explored experience from the inside, carefully observing how thoughts arise, how emotions shape perception, and how suffering is created and relieved. What he shared was not a system of blind belief, but a method of inquiry. For centuries, the Buddha's teachings were viewed primarily as spiritual or philosophical. Yet in recent decades, something remarkable has occurred. As modern science has begun to investigate the mind with advanced tools, brain imaging, psychological studies, and behavioral research, it has started to uncover insights that closely parallel what the Buddha described long ago. This does not mean that science replaces spirituality, nor that ancient teachings anticipated every modern discovery. Rather, it shows that careful inner observation and careful external measurement can arrive at the same truths. The Buddha encouraged seekers to test his teachings through personal experience. In the Kalama Sutta, he advised people not to accept ideas simply because they were ancient, respected, or widely believed, but to examine whether they led to greater clarity, compassion, and freedom from suffering. This spirit of inquiry closely resembles the scientific method itself. In this video, we will explore several core Buddhist teachings that modern science now supports, not as absolute proof, but as meaningful convergence. We will look at how the mind shapes experience, why craving leads to dissatisfaction, how impermanence affects well-being, and how mindfulness and compassion benefit both mental and physical health. As you listen, you are invited to reflect gently on your own experience. Let this exploration be a meeting point between wisdom and evidence, tradition and discovery. With openness and curiosity, let us begin. The mind shapes experience. The Buddha opened the Dhammapada with a statement that remains strikingly relevant today. Mind precedes all phenomena. Mind is their chief, they are all mind-made. With this, he pointed to a fundamental truth, that our experience of the world is deeply shaped by the condition of the mind. The Buddha did not claim that external reality is an illusion. Rather, he observed that suffering and well-being arise from how the mind interprets experience. Two people may encounter the same event, yet one suffers deeply while the other remains steady. The difference lies not in the situation itself, but in the mental habits brought to it. Modern neuroscience and psychology strongly support this insight. Research shows that perception is an active process. The brain does not merely receive information, it organizes, filters, and interprets sensory input based on prior beliefs, emotional states, and expectations. This is known as top-down processing. What we think influences what we see. Studies on stress and anxiety reveal that habitual patterns of negative thinking amplify emotional distress and even physical symptoms. Conversely, cultivating awareness and balanced interpretation reduces suffering and improves resilience. This aligns closely with the Buddha's teaching that unexamined thoughts perpetuate dissatisfaction. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness as the means to see these mental processes clearly. By observing thoughts as events rather than facts, one begins to loosen their influence. This simple shift creates space between experience and reaction. Science now confirms that awareness changes perception. The Buddha taught this through inner observation long before it could be measured. Together, they point to a powerful conclusion. While we may not control all circumstances, we can transform our experience by understanding the mind that meets them. Suffering arises from craving and attachment. At the heart of the Buddha's teaching lies the second noble truth. Suffering arises from craving and attachment. The Buddha used the word ta to describe this craving, a restless wanting that seeks pleasure, certainty, identity, or control in an ever-changing world. He observed that even pleasant experiences, when clung to, become sources of anxiety and disappointment. Modern psychology now strongly supports this insight. Research on addiction, anxiety, and consumer behavior consistently shows that compulsive desire increases distress rather than satisfaction. The more tightly people cling to outcomes, relationships, or self-images, the more vulnerable they become to fear and frustration when change occurs. One well-studied phenomenon, hedonic adaptation, demonstrates that gains in pleasure, whether through wealth, achievement, or possessions, quickly return to a baseline level of happiness. This leads to a cycle of wanting more without lasting fulfillment, precisely as the Buddha described more than 2 millennia ago. Neuroscience further explains how craving operates. Dopamine, often called the reward chemical, is more closely associated with anticipation than satisfaction. It drives seeking, not contentment. This biological mechanism mirrors the Buddha's observation that craving perpetuates restlessness rather than peace. The Buddha did not teach the elimination of all desire, but the understanding of its limits. When craving dominates the mind, it narrows attention and intensifies suffering. When craving softens, space opens for contentment, clarity, and balance. Modern therapeutic approaches such as acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness-based interventions echo this principle. They encourage reducing attachment to outcomes and cultivating psychological flexibility. Both ancient wisdom and modern science point to the same conclusion: lasting well-being arises not from satisfying every desire, but from understanding and loosening the grip of craving itself. Impermanence is the nature of reality. One of the Buddha's most foundational teachings is anicca, or impermanence, the insight that all conditioned things are in a constant state of change. The Buddha taught that suffering does not arise simply because things change, but because we expect them not to. We cling to health, relationships, success, emotions, and even identities as though they were stable, and when change inevitably occurs, distress follows. Modern science now confirms impermanence at every observable level of reality. In biology, the human body continuously renews itself, cells die and regenerate, and the body you inhabit today is not the same one you had years ago. In neuroscience, the brain is shown to be plastic, constantly reshaping neural connections in response to experience, learning, and attention. Even personality traits once thought fixed are now understood to be adaptable. Psychological research strongly supports the Buddha's insight that resistance to change increases suffering. Studies show that individuals who struggle most with anxiety and depression often hold rigid expectations about how life should unfold, how they should feel, or who they should be. When reality deviates from these expectations, distress intensifies. Conversely, practices that cultivate acceptance of change, such as mindfulness and cognitive flexibility, are associated with greater emotional resilience and well-being. This aligns precisely with the Buddha's teaching that wisdom begins when one clearly sees the transient nature of experience. Importantly, impermanence is not meant to inspire detachment from life, but deeper appreciation. When we understand that moments are fleeting, we are less likely to take them for granted and less likely to cling in fear. The Buddha taught impermanence as a liberating truth. Science now echoes this wisdom. Change is not a failure of reality, it is its fundamental nature. Peace arises not by resisting change, but by learning to move gracefully with it. Mindfulness rewires the brain. The Buddha placed mindfulness, sati, at the center of his path to freedom from suffering. In the Satipatthana Sutta, he described mindfulness as systematic awareness of the body, feelings, mind, and mental phenomena. This practice was not presented as a spiritual luxury, but as a practical method for understanding experience clearly and reducing distress. Modern neuroscience now provides strong evidence supporting the Buddha's emphasis on mindfulness. Brain imaging studies show that regular mindfulness practice leads to measurable changes in brain structure and function. Areas associated with attention, emotional regulation, and self-awareness, such as the prefrontal cortex, become stronger and more active. At the same time, activity in regions linked to fear and stress, including the amygdala, is reduced. Psychological research demonstrates that mindfulness decreases rumination, anxiety, and depression, while improving focus and emotional resilience. Clinical programs like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, have been widely studied and shown to reduce stress, chronic pain, and relapse into depression. The Buddha taught mindfulness as a way to observe thoughts and emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. Science confirms that this observational stance creates psychological distance, allowing individuals to respond rather than react. This shift reduces impulsivity and increases clarity. Importantly, mindfulness is not about emptying the mind or avoiding life. It is about meeting experience fully and skillfully. Even brief periods of mindful attention have been shown to calm the nervous system and improve emotional balance. What the Buddha taught through direct inner observation, science now confirms through data. Training attention changes the brain, and a trained mind experiences greater freedom, stability, and well-being. Compassion benefits both giver and receiver. The Buddha taught compassion, karu, and loving kindness, metta, not as moral ideals to be admired, but as practical mental states that reduce suffering for oneself and others. In the early texts, compassion is described as a natural response that arises when the heart understands suffering clearly and wishes for its relief. Modern science now strongly supports this teaching. Research in psychology and neuroscience shows that compassion is not merely an emotional virtue, it is a biological and psychological resource. Studies reveal that compassionate thoughts and actions activate reward centers in the brain, releasing chemicals such as oxytocin and dopamine, which promote feelings of connection, safety, and well-being. Compassion practices have been shown to lower stress hormones like cortisol, reduce inflammation, and improve immune function. Individuals who regularly engage in acts of kindness report lower levels of anxiety and depression, as well as higher life satisfaction. These findings echo the Buddha's insight that a mind oriented toward care and goodwill is less burdened by fear and hostility. Importantly, the Buddha emphasized that compassion includes oneself. Self-compassion reduces harsh self-judgment and allows the mind to recover more quickly from failure or pain. Modern therapeutic approaches now recognize self-compassion as a key factor in emotional resilience and mental health. Social neuroscience further confirms that humans are deeply wired for connection. Chronic isolation increases the risk of illness and emotional distress, while supportive and compassionate relationships enhance longevity and psychological stability. The Buddha taught that compassion dissolves the illusion of separation. Science now reveals that compassion strengthens the nervous system and stabilizes emotional life. What ancient wisdom expressed through insight, modern research now demonstrates through evidence. Compassion is not weakness, it is a source of strength, balance, and healing for both the giver and the receiver. The self is not fixed. One of the Buddha's most profound and challenging teachings is anatta, often translated as non-self. The Buddha observed that what we commonly call the self is not a fixed, independent entity, but a dynamic process made up of sensations, thoughts, emotions, memories, and perceptions. Suffering arises when we cling to this process as though it were permanent and unchanging. Modern neuroscience increasingly supports this insight. Brain research shows that there is no single, stable center in the brain where a permanent self resides. Instead, the sense of identity is continuously constructed through interacting neural networks that change over time. Memory, attention, and emotion all contribute to the feeling of I, yet none of them remain constant. Psychology also confirms that rigid self-identities are closely linked to distress. When individuals define themselves narrowly, I am a failure, I must always be strong, or I am this role, they experience greater anxiety and emotional suffering when circumstances shift. In contrast, psychological flexibility, the ability to see identity as fluid, is associated with better mental health and resilience. The Buddha taught that understanding non-self does not erase personality or responsibility. Rather, it frees the mind from excessive self-protection and defensiveness. When identity is seen as flexible, criticism feels less threatening, change becomes easier to accept, and compassion for oneself and others grows naturally. Modern therapeutic approaches, such as mindfulness-based therapies and acceptance-based psychology, echo this teaching by encouraging people to observe thoughts and self-stories without identifying with them completely. Both ancient wisdom and modern science converge on this insight. Freedom arises when we stop clinging to a fixed idea of who we are. By seeing the self as a process rather than a possession, the mind becomes lighter, more adaptable, and less burdened by fear. Where ancient wisdom meets modern understanding as we come to the close of this exploration, it becomes clear that the meeting point between the Buddha's teachings and modern science is not coincidence, but convergence. Both arise from careful observation, one through direct awareness of inner experience, the other through systematic study of the mind and body. When these two perspectives meet, they illuminate the same human truths from different directions. The Buddha never asked his followers to accept his teachings on faith alone. He encouraged inquiry, reflection, and personal verification. In this way, his approach mirrors the spirit of science itself, a willingness to observe honestly and revise understanding based on experience. Modern research now confirms many of the Buddha's insights, that the mind shapes experience, that craving fuels dissatisfaction, that everything changes, that attention can be trained, that compassion heals, and that the self is not as fixed as it appears. These teachings are not meant to remain abstract ideas. They are invitations to practice, to observe your thoughts, soften attachment, welcome change, and cultivate awareness and kindness in daily life. Even small shifts in attention or intention can produce meaningful changes in well-being. It is important to remember that science does not replace wisdom, and wisdom does not oppose science. Together, they offer a more complete understanding of what it means to live well. One explains the mechanisms, the other guides the heart. As you move forward, you need not adopt any belief system. Simply notice what reduces suffering and what increases clarity, compassion, and peace. The Buddha suggested this simple test long ago, and it remains just as relevant today. If this reflection brought insight or reassurance, you are warmly invited to like this video, share it with another seeker, and subscribe for more explorations where ancient wisdom meets modern understanding. May your inquiry remain curious, your mind clear, and your path gentle. Thank you for listening.